Do you hear it too? The question had become a curse in the town of Willowmere. The sound of faint, irregular tinkling crept into people's dreams, haunted the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, and drove neighbors to the edge of madness. Every night, without fail, the wind chime hanging from the porch of the old Calder house sang its eerie, metallic song, whispering through the cold air like laughter at a funeral. No one could escape it. Not even him, the man, who hung it there, bound by a dead man's will and a promise that felt more like a sentence. It hadn't always been that way. Before the will, before the madness, before the wind itself seemed to carry secrets, Arthur Calder was just another man trying to outlive his regrets. Here's the... been estranged from his father for nearly a decade, long enough that the old man's name meant nothing more to him than a line on a dusty family tree. When the lawyer called about the inheritance, Arthur almost hung up. Boudoir Cader estateeship held a gravity that made him pause. He drove up the next morning, a 3-hour trip that felt like a pilgrimage through ghosts. The Calder property sat at the edge of town, beyond the sycamores that leaned in like gossiping women. The house itself was large, creaking with secrets, its wraparound porch lined with peeling paint and shadows. When he arrived, the lawyer was already waiting, a grey-suited man with the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Calder, the lawyer greeted him with a curt nod. I assume you're aware of your passing after your dead, though he fair. Technically, the lawyer said, flipping through a folder, though there were complications. It seems your father spent his final days somewhat unwell. Arthur gave a hollow laugh. He's been unwell for as long as I can remember. The lawyer ignored the jab and handed him a sealed envelope, the kind used for wills and deathbed confessions. Your father left something quite unique, Eben. You'll want to read this yourself. Arthur slit the envelope open and unfolded the letter. His father's handwriting was unmistakable, rigid, deliberate, every word carved as if it were meant to outlast stone. Asterisk, my son, if you're reading this, I am dead. You were never a dutiful child, but perhaps you can still be a dutiful heir. The Calder legacy has rules you've long ignored, but which cannot be escaped. If you wish to claim what is rightfully yours, you must hang the wind chime that rests in the box below this letter upon the front porch. It must remain there, undisturbed, for 365 days, should you fail to keep it hung, should a single day pass without its song, you forfeit everything. The estate, the inheritance. Even the land will be sold to the county. There are reasons. Arthur, the wind remembers things we cannot. Keep it singing, and you'll come to understand. Your father, Elias Calder. Asterisk. Arthur frowned and looked up. You're telling me this is real? That my inheritance depends on a wind chime? The lawyer hesitated. It appears so. I'm merely the executor, Mr. Calder. The terms are binding. He chuckled. That's insane. Perhaps, the lawyer said softly, but legally enforceable. You'll find the chime in the chest beneath the porch rail. Arthur walked out to the porch with a half-smile, the kind that masks disbelief. Sure enough, there was an old wooden chest, weather-beaten and locked with a rusted clasp. Inside lay a wind chime, delicate and strange, made of silver rods that gleamed faintly, though. He'd seen before. The rods were etched with patterns that looked almost like runes, their edges cold and sharp to the touch. He held it up to the light, and for an instant, the air seemed to shiver around him. Fine, he muttered, half to himself, half to the ghost of the old man. If this is what it takes, he hung it from the porch beam, right beside the front door. The sound it made as the breeze caught it was oddly musical, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just haunting, a song that felt like it came from nowhere and everywhere at once. By nightfall, the first neighbor came. Knocking. Excuse me, Mr. Calder. It was Mrs. Baines, the woman who lived across the dirt road. She was in her 60s, kind-faced but visibly tense. I hate to bother you, but that thing... She gestured toward the chime, which was whispering faintly in the twilight. It's unnerving. Arthur smirked. Itegatejus. A wind chime, Mrs. Baines. Her lips pressed in. Maybe, but it sounds wrong. Like it's calling something. He laughed it off, offered her a polite good night, and closed the door. That was the first night. By the third, he stopped laughing. The sound never ceased, not even when the air was still. The chime moved on its own, tinkling softly in moments when the night was breathless. He'd wake at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, hearing it even through closed windows. Sometimes it sounded far away, like it was drifting through the walls. Other times, it was right above his bed, as if the house itself were humming along. When he mentioned it to the lawyer over the phone, the man's tone changed. "You've kept it up, yes?" "Of course. Why? A pause? And keep it that way. Don't disturb it." "Not under any circumstances." Arthur frowned. "You're kidding." But the line had already gone dead. That night, as he stood by the window, he saw something move beneath the porch light, something pale and shifting in the wind. The chime was still singing, but the air around it seemed heavy, like a heartbeat slowing down. He whispered to the empty room, "What the hell did you do, old man?" And the wind chime answered with a note so deep and hollow, it sounded almost like a voice. The next morning, he found footprints in the dirt, bare, small, circling beneath the chime like a dance. And though the ground was dry, each print glistened faintly with moisture, as if left by something that had come from the rain. Arthur stared at them for a long time before whispering, "It's just the wind." Just the wind. But the wind, somehow, seemed to laugh. The fourth night, Arthur dreamed of his father. Not the frail, dying version he'd last seen at the hospital, but the younger, Elias Calder, the man who once loomed large over their house, with sharp eyes and hands that could silence a room. In the dream, Elias was sitting on the porch, staring at the wind chime as it turned lazily in the breeze. His lips moved, but no sound came out, only the metallic whisper of the chime, rising and falling like a breath. When Arthur tried to call out to him, his father turned and smiled a terrible, knowing smile, and the wind chime shattered into 1,000 slivers of light. Arthur woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The room was utterly still. No wind, no sound. And then, just as he began to believe it was over, the chime outside rang once. Once, that single note carried through the walls like a heartbeat. He could feel it in his teeth. By morning, Arthur was no longer pretending it didn't bother him. Emadkoff, he sat on that the thing. It looked ordinary in daylight, swinging gently, flashing silver when the sun hit it. Yet the symbols etched along each rod seemed to shimmer faintly, like heat rising off asphalt. He thought of taking it down. Lydian and him clywada tame even terms of gaze. What would really happen if he stopped? Would he just lose the estate? Or was there more to his father's warning, something darker, buried in that maddening phrase, "The wind remembers"? Things we cannot. That afternoon, the mail arrived. An envelope, yellowed and unmarked. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in the same rigid script as his father's will. "You've hung it. Good. The house has begun to wake. Do not be afraid of what you hear. The wind will test you. Do not let it fall silent. No signature." Arthur scanned the horizon. The nearest neighbor's way. No car truck, no footprint. By nightfall, the air turned restless. The chime began to sing before the first gust even reached the porch. Its tone shifted, more intricate now, more deliberate. Arthur sat by the window with a drink in his hand, watching. The sound filled the house, low, rising, lilting. Then, beneath it, he thought he heard something else. A voice. At first, it was soft, almost like a whisper tangled in the chime's rhythm. Then it grew clearer, syllables forming. He pressed his ear to the cold window glass. "A.R." The whiskey slipped from his hand and shattered. He stumbled outside, barefoot, the night pressing heavy around him. Chime. Perfectly still, though the sound continued, an impossible harmony of wind and word. Arthur. Estaredatit his bruised bras, hilens. Then, slowly, the rod swayed again, whispering something he couldn't quite catch. Etori done it blind planik. He ripped the chime from the hook, its sharp edges slicing his palm. The sound stopped. Instantly, leaving the air hollow. The sudden quiet was almost worse. He stood there, panting, his blood dripping onto the porch boards. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, somewhere deep in the walls of the house, something shifted. The boards under his feet trembled. A groan rippled through the beams like a creature waking from a long sleep. From inside the house, he heard the sound of doors creaking open, though none had been shut. And then came the wind. It burst from nowhere, slamming into him so hard he staggered back. The air roared through the porch like a scream, lifting dust, shaking the rafters. He tried to move, but the gale pinned him, pressing his shirt against his chest. The chime, still clutched in his hand, vibrated violently, the rods clanging together though. His grip was tight. Put it back, a voice hissed deep, layered, coming from the wind itself. Arthur dropped the chime. It fell to the porch with a metallic cry, spinning wildly. He lunged for it, hung it back on the hook, and the wind stopped. Just like that. Silence, sudden and absolute. He stood trembling, his hand still bleeding. Jesus Christ, he muttered, backing toward the door. Inside, he bandaged his palm, drank until the shaking stopped, and told himself it was all in his head. But when he finally turned off the lights and climbed into bed, the chime began to sing again softly, almost tenderly, as though nothing had happened. The next morning, Mrs. Baines was gone. Her house sat empty, her door ajar, coffee still warm on the kitchen counter. The sheriff came by, asked questions Arthur couldn't answer, took one look at the chime, and frowned. That new, he asked. Arthur no de back of Hege. Your father had one just like it years ago. Used to drive the neighbors crazy, said it kept the house clean. He paused. When he took it down one winter, well, that's when things started getting weird. Arthur stared. Weird. How? Voices. Lights. Folks said they saw him talking to the wind. The sheriff gave him a long look. You might want to keep that thing up. Just to be safe, that night, Arthur sat by the window again, watching. He noticed something he hadn't before. Each time the chime moved, the trees along the property line swayed not in rhythm with the breeze, but in response to the sound, like they were listening. And beneath the chime's melody, he began to hear new voices faint, pleading, distant, not one, dozens, maybe hundreds. He pressed his hand against the glass and whispered, "What are you?" The answer came not from the wind chime, but from behind him from the dark corner of the room where no one stood. "We are what your father promised to the wind," he turned. But there was nothing there, only the open window and the slow, steady song of the chime outside. That night, he did not sleep at all. By the 7th day, Arthur had stopped pretending the chime was harmless. He moved through the house like a man being followed, every floorboard creak sounding like an answer to a question he hadn't asked. The air itself felt alive, charged, restless, as though the house inhaled whenever he exhaled. Each night brought new sounds, knocks that came in threes, faint whispers seeping from behind the walls, and the distant hum of voices when the chime sang its eerie tune. Sometimes, in the spaces between those sounds, Arthur could swear he heard laughter childlike, light, and utterly out of place in that old house. The worst part was the dreams. They came in fragments. A field of tall grass rippling under black clouds. His father standing at the center, holding the wind chime like a talisman. And behind him shapes moving in the storm, bending unnaturally, whispering in a language that wasn't human. Each time, his father would look over his shoulder and say, "You'll understand soon, son," on the morning of the 8th day. Arthur woke to find dirt scattered across the floor near the front door. Small, muddy footprints trailed inward, too small to be his. He followed them into the living room where they simply stopped, mid-step, as if whoever had made them had vanished into the air. He spent an hour searching the house, checking closets, the basement, even under furniture. Nothing, no sign of intrusion. Yet the footprints remained, their edges damp. By noon, the sound of the chime had changed again. It no longer tinkled, it sang. The tones were layered, harmonious, almost beautiful in their precision. Arthur found himself standing on the porch, staring at it for what felt like hours, lost in its rhythm. His mind would drift, his eyes would glaze, and every so often, he'd hear his name buried within the melody, like a secret whispered from the edge of sleep. That evening, he called the lawyer again. "Mr. Fenwick, it's Calder," Arthur said, his voice low. "I need you to tell me exactly what my father meant about this." Wind chime. The lawyer exhaled heavily. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. Arthur's grip tightened on the phone. "What's going on here?" Fenwick's voice lowered to a whisper. "Your father." He wasn't well toward the end. He claimed the chime was an anchor. Said it kept something from crossing over. He called it the toll of remembrance. I didn't believe him, but after the Incidents? Well, what incidents? Your father's caretaker disappeared. Right after he took it down one winter to polish it. No sign of struggle. Doors locked from the inside. The police thought he'd run off, but your father swore the wind took him. Arthur's mouth went dry. The wind. Yes, he said the house remembers. That the air carries debt. The lawyer's tone grew strained. Whatever your father got himself into, I suggest you follow his instruction king hanging. And whatever you do, Mr. Calder, don't listen to closely when it sings. The line went dead. Arthur stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, the sound of the chime bleeding faintly through the walls like a heartbeat. That night, he tried earplugs. Didn't help. The sound was in the walls, in his bones, beneath his thoughts. When he closed his eyes, he could still see the chime swaying, silver glinting like teeth, in the dark. Around midnight, a knock came at the door, 3 sharp raps. He froze, every muscle tensed. He waited. Nothing. Then 3 more knocks, this time softer. He moved to the peephole. There was no one there. But as he stared, he realized the chime wasn't moving. No wind, no sound, absolute stillness. Slowly, carefully, he opened the door. The porch was empty. The night stretched out before him dark, silent, heavy with the scent of wet earth. Then he heard it, faint breathing, coming from beneath the porch steps. "Hello," he whispered. Something shifted in the shadows below. Esmal. Deliberate movements. Arthur crouched, peering into the darkness and saw 2 pale hands gripping the underside of the porch rail. Small hands, child-sized. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The hands retreated slowly, vanishing into blackness. Then, from beneath the floorboards, came the faint sound of giggling. He bolted inside and slammed the door. The chime began to sing again. Morning, he decided to test something. He hummed a small bell, his Porch normal bell. But from there, as the afternoon wind picked up, the bell rang softly, blending with the chime song. For a few moments, the sounds harmonized and then the chime asterisk answered, asterisk its tone darkened, grew louder, almost angry. The bell sound was swallowed, absorbed by the chime's furious resonance until it cracked in half and fell silent. Arthur stared in disbelief. The air was thick, trembling with something unseen. That night, the whispers returned closer this time. They came from every corner of the house, overlapping, murmuring his name. He could make out fragments of phrases. He promised us. The debt must be paid. Keep it singing. Arthur fled to the porch, desperate for air. The chime swayed in the moonlight, its motion slow and deliberate. And there standing beneath it was his father. Elias Calder looked exactly as he had in Arthur's dream. Stern, spectral, eyes like smoke. Father. Arthur breathed. The figure tilted its head. You shouldn't have taken it down. Arthur stumbled backward, his pulse hammering. You're not real. The apparition smiled faintly. Real enough for the wind to remember. Arthur blinked and Elias was gone. Only the chime remained, turning gently in the breeze. But as Arthur stepped closer, he noticed something new. The runes etched along the rods had changed. They now formed words his own name, repeated again and again, like a curse etched in metal. Uninformed. First time, Arthur realized the truth. The chime wasn't just singing. It was asterisk learning his voice. Asterisk by the 10th night, Arthur no longer distinguished between waking and dreaming. The wind chime had become a pulse in the house and organ that breathed through the walls. Its steady, metallic rhythm shaping every hour of his existence. He could no longer eat without hearing its song. Could no longer sleep without seeing faces pressed against the glass when it rang. It was no longer merely an object. It was a presence, a covenant that hummed with intent. He started recording it. A cheap voice recorder he found in one of the desk drawers. The plan was simple: capture the sound, analyze it, prove to himself it was just metal and wind. The first few hours of playback were harmless enough. Nothing more than soft tinkling and the occasional gust. But when he left the recorder running overnight, the morning brought something else entirely. The playback began, normally the familiar song, the faint creaks of the porch. Then came whispers. Low at first, distorted, like someone murmuring underwater. He turned the volume up. The whispers grew clearer, overlapping. Human. Arthur, one voice said. Arthur, open the door. Another breathed. Arthur, you know us. His own name, repeated dozens. Of times, each voice slight in gender. Some pleading, some laughing, some weeping. He dropped the recorder, heart hammering. It clattered onto the table, but the playback continued, the voices rising, until a single phrase broke through the chaos crisp. Sharp, and unmistakably, his father's voice. Keep it singing, or they'll come inside. Arthur! Smashed the recorder! He sat in silence afterward, the house to still, the air heavy with something unseen, but aware. Then the chime began again softly at first, then with growing intensity, as though it had been waiting for him to listen. The melody now carried layers, not just tones, but asterisk words asterisk buried in the sound. Like speech reversed or pulled from another world. He pressed his hands to his ears. It didn't help. The sound was in him now. By noon, the temperature dropped suddenly, the way it does before a storm, though the sky remained a cloudless blue. The trees surrounding the property stood unnaturally still, not a single leaf moving. Yet the chime swayed wildly, its rod striking in deliberate, rhythm 5 notes. Pause, then. 5 again, over and over, a pattern. Arthur watched from the porch, his breath visible despite the heat. What do you want from me? He shouted. The chime rang 5 times again, almost mocking him. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind him in the house, came the sound of asterisk answering chimes to asterisk. He turned sharply. Another sound echoed from the hallway metallic, identical. He followed it, moving slowly through the dim rooms until he reached the study. There, hanging from the ceiling beam, was another wind chime smaller, older, its rods rusted but intact. It was swaying on its own, though the windows were closed. Arthur's throat tightened. He hadn't seen this one before. It wasn't here when he moved in. He reached out, fingers trembling, and touched one of the rods. It was cold freezing, as if pulled from ice. Instantly, a whisper bloomed inside his head. Asterisk, you're late. Asterisk Arthur stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The chime continued to sway, its sound blending with the one outside until the two merged into a single, droning harmony. And beneath that sound, faintly, like a heartbeat behind glass, something moved in the walls. Air! Outside, gasping for air, gripping the porch rail until his knuckles whitened. Main chime was vibrating now violently, the silver, rods clashing, so hard they sparked faintly. Stop it! He shouted, his voice raw. What the hell do you want? For a moment the sound ceased, the air hung dead and silent. Then from deep within the property's pranatishim. Then another, then dozens of forest of wind, chimes was ringing. In repli beir. Arthur's stomach dropped, he could hear them clearly. Now the sound, moving closer, through the trees deliberate and rhythmic the air thrummed. With unseen motion, like hundreds of metallic tongues whispering secrets to the wind, he backed toward the door, eyes wide, whispering to himself. This isn't real, this can't be real. But the sound didn't stop, it surrounded the house, circling. It each note weaving into the next until the melody became almost human, a chorus, a dirge, and in the center of it his father's voice rose above the others. A year, Arthur. You promised them a year. Arthur slammed the door, locked it, and stumbled backward until he hit the wall. The voices outside didn't fade, they entered. He could hear them, moving now. Walking through the halls, through the floorboards, through the air itself. That night, he tried leaving. He packed a bag, grabbed his car keys, and drove down the dirt road. But 10 minutes later, the same house appeared ahead of him. Again, same mailbox, same peeling porch paint, same chime singing in the wind. He stopped the car, trembling the road, stretched on behind him, but the world felt folded, turned inside out. The air shimmered faintly, as though he were looking through a mirage, and then from the passenger seat beside him came a soft metallic tink. He turned the wind. Chime was hanging from the rearview mirror. He screamed, slammed the door open, and stumbled out into the road. The car engine cut off. The chime in the mirror swung, lazily singing to the empty air. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch until dawn, staring at the chime, which now seemed to glow faintly with each breath of wind. In the first pale light of morning, he saw something new. Tiny figures like shadows moved within the shimmer of its reflection. On the porch boards, dozens of them, children, old men, women with hollow eyes. Their lips moved silently in unison, mouthing something he couldn't hear. Then, as one, they looked up at him, and for the first time Arthur understood what the chime was singing. It wasn't keeping them away, it was keeping them in. Arthur didn't eat for 2 days. He couldn't. Every time he tried, the sound found its way between his thoughts turning even the silence of chewing into a cadence that matched the chime's rhythm. His reflection in the kitchen window had begun to look thinner, his eyes ringed, with grey, his hair damp, with sweat even when the air was cool. The wind never stopped. He had tried recording it again, writing down what he heard, even attempting to map the tones on a sheet of music paper. It wasn't random. There was a pattern, deliberate as a heartbeat. Every 57th note the rhythm faltered, not naturally, but as if something beneath it had sighed. He had stopped believing in coincidence. The 12th day brought rain. Not a normal storm, the kind that rattles windows and makes you close the blinds, but a whispering kind of rain, fine and constant, soaking the ground. Without a sound, and yet over it all the chime sang louder than ever. Arthur stood in the doorway and listened. The runes on its rods gleamed like lightning trapped in silver. The sound shifted again, not the tinkling of wind and metal, but music. Real music, minor chords dissonant, rising in a slow crescendo. Then came words, not whispers this time. Not from the woods, not from inside the house, but from the chime itself. After colder. It's a frozato cold air, per brain dried. Who's speaking? Those who were promised the chime replied, its tones harmonizing into a chorus. The words were shaped by sound itself, as if the metal vibrated language into the air. Promised what? He demanded. The keeping it, said the wind, remembers its bargains. Arthur felt the floor tilt under his feet. My father made a deal. Your father gave us song, it answered. We gave him silence. When the chime sleeps, we wake. The rain stopped. The silence that followed was so absolute that it made his ears ring, and then without warning the house exhaled. The walls groaned, the floorboard shifted, and the temperature dropped so fast that his breath turned to mist. Behind him a voice whispered, he kept us for 70 years, you must keep us now. He turned sharply. The hallway was dark, but something was there, shapes faint, moving like smoke, faces forming, dissolving. They filled the hall, whispering over each other in dozens of languages, their words layered into one echoing phrase, don't let it stop. Arthur backed into the living room, tripping over the rug. He grabbed the poker from the fireplace and swung wildly at the air. It passed through nothing but the chime outside answered the motion. With a violent crash of sound, the whispering stopped. He stood shaking the poker, still raised, listening. The air seemed to hold its breath. Then, faintly, from the kitchen came the sound of dripping water. Maybe. He moved closer, heart pounding. The sink was dry. But there on the counter, beside the broken recorder, was a glass half full of something clear. He hadn't poured it. Condensation ran down its side, slow, deliberate. Arthur reached for it. The surface of the water rippled. Then, in the reflection, he saw a face, his father's again, pale and distant, looking up at him through the glass. Stop, Arthur whispered. Please. The reflection smiled faintly. The year must be complete. Arthur dropped the glass. It shattered across the floor, the water spreading toward the wall. The face was gone. He stumbled back onto the porch, desperate for air, and screamed into the wind. I didn't make any deal. This isn't mine. The chime swung violently, its tones rising in fury. The sky darkened, clouds forming out of nowhere. Lightning flared in the distance. And then, beneath the chime's song came a voice he hadn't heard before, small, fragile, almost human. A girl's voice. Help us. Arthur froze. He turned toward the trees. A figure stood there, just at the edge of the woods, a girl, maybe 9 or 10, hair hanging wet against her cheeks. She was barefoot, her white dress clinging to her knees. He took a cautious step forward. Who are you? Her voice carried clearly through the storm. We were the first ones. He made us sing. Arthur's throat tightened. My father. She nodded. He said the wind needed a memory. That the sound kept it alive. But it's not the wind anymore. What is it? The girl looked up at the sky, and when she spoke again, her voice wasn't just hers, it was hundreds, echoing from the trees, the earth, the air itself. It's what he left behind. The storm broke. Rain came down in sheets, but the chime didn't move. It hung motionless, even as wind tore through the porch. The melody still rang, now from everywhere at once. The house shook, windows rattled, lights flickered. Arthur fell to his knees, clutching his ears. What do you want from me? Hey, screamed, and in the thunder's reply came a voice so loud it felt like it was spoken inside his skull. We want to stop. The sound died abruptly. No wind, no rain, just silence. Then the chime fell. It hit the porch with a metallic shriek, the rods scattering across the boards like bones. The silence that followed was suffocating, total, absolute. Arthur felt tears prick his eyes. He crawled forward, reached for one of the rods and froze. The runes were gone. In their place was a single, engraved line, written in a child's shaky handwriting. 1 year, or 1 life. The air around him grew heavy again. From inside the house, a door creaked open. Arthur looked up. Standing in the doorway was his father, solid now, not a ghost. His eyes gleamed with something like pity. "You, Brooke?" "The song," Elias said softly. Now they'll sing on their own, and from deep within the house, the walls began to hum. 1,000 tiny voices, 1,000 tiny songs, all of them whispering the same thing. Arthur Calder, Eve. "It's your turn to hang." Arthur staggered backward until his spine struck the porch railing. The air inside the house trembled, humming with the resonance of the 1,000 voices that now sang within its ribs. He could feel the vibration through the floorboards, through his shoes, through his skin. Every note burrowed under his heartbeat like a parasite. "Father," he rasped. "What did you do?" Elias Calder steaboved into shadow. His voice was eerily calm, as though he were reciting a prayer he had memorized a long time ago. "What I had to. The Calder bloodline was dying. The wind took everything from us, our fields, our house, our name. Megan on the première képite. I gave them a voice to live in, a song that could never end. Arthur's breath came shallow. A song. You cursed this place. You cursed me." Elias's gaze darkened. "No, I gave you life. You think you would exist without their mercy. Every Calder has been born because the wind remembered us. It keeps the blood moving, Arthur. But the song must never stop." Behind him, the air thickened and shadows poured through the hallway like smoke. Shapes coalesced, faces flickering in and out of existence, mouths open, in silent notes. The sound grew louder, richer, a rising harmony that seemed to fill not just the house, but the night itself. Arthur shouted over the noise, "I won't be your keeper. I won't." Elias stepped forward, his feet not quite touching the floor. "You already are." The moment you hung it, you accepted the inheritance. Arthur's vision blurred. The air felt too dense to breathe. No, I can end it. I can burn it." He turned, lunged toward the porch where the broken wind chime lay scattered. He snatched one of the rods, its surface freezing against his skin. The metal pulsed faintly, alive. He threw it into the yard, then another, each one vanishing into the tall grass like a sinking stone. But the sound didn't stop. The house continued to sing. He dropped. Doig, clutching his head, had stopped. "I destroyed it." Elias's voice came from everywhere at once, through the walls, through the air, even from the earth beneath the porch. The chime was never the song, Arthur. It was only the mouth. "The music lives in you now." Arthur froze. He could feel it, the vibration inside his chest. A fin, rhythmic hum that matched the chime's melody perfectly. He pressed his hand to his sternum and felt it resonate, as if his ribs were the new rods, his lungs the new bells. He stumbled to his feet. No, but the song rose anyway, pouring from his throat in a sound that wasn't human. It began as a groan, then twisted into something melodic, metallic, pure, piercing. His jaw locked open, his body arching as the notes tore through him. The house responded. The walls trembled, the glass windows pulsing like lungs. Shadows poured out from every corner, coalescing into forms, men, women, children, all half translucent, their faces glowing faintly with silver light. They gathered around him, eyes wide, expressions of relief and hunger intermingled. Elias's ghost approached, his outline flickering. "You see now, the wind keeps what it is owed. They are the memory. Arthur, the ones who were forgotten." The chime calls them home. Arthur tried to speak, but all that came out was a tone-along, ringing note that echoed through the night like a bell struck underwater. The air shimmered. The spirit shivered, as if fed by the sound. "Stop," he managed to choke out. "You're killing me." Elias shook his head sadly. "Not killing, son. Completing." The front door blew open. Wind screamed through the hall, scattering papers and dust into a cyclone of motion. The voices of the dead rose into a frenzied chorus. Outside, the forest answered the hundreds of unseen chimes Arthur had heard before, began to ring again. À la séance! The sound layered upon itself until the very ground seemed to vibrate. Arthur staggered into the yard, his body trembling with each note he unwillingly sang. He fell to his knees in the grass. Around him, with figures dozens, 100, or reaching straw hands. Please. He gasped. Let me go. The voices replied as one, an ocean of sound that made the air ripple. Keep us in the wind. He screamed as the melody built inside his chest. His ribs ached as though something were pushing outward. The silver glow intensified, spreading from his throat to his hands. When he looked down, the runes had begun to carve themselves into his skin-thin, glowing lines forming circles and sigils that pulsed with rhythm. From the porch, Elias's ghost watched, his expression unreadable. You'll learn to live with it. I did. Arthur's head snapped up. His voice came out hollow, resonant, carrying the faint, metallic edge of the chime. Then why did you die? Elias's form flickered, fading. Because I stopped listening. The Winsurget. Arthur's scream merged with the sound of 1,000 unseen chimes, and for a heartbeat, the world itself seemed to bend. The forest tilted, the stars spun, and the very air became liquid with noise. Then sudden silence. The night was still. Arthur lay on his side in the grass, gasping. The glow from his skin faded slowly. The runes now burned into his flesh like scars. The porch stood quiet. Behind him, the broken chime gone, but the Estilker's Arthur Calder air of the breath. He sat up, trembling. Hang the wind, and though his hands shook, he rose, walked to the porch, and reached for the nail where the chime had once hung. Something compelled him, something older than his fear. He held out his hand, and one of the silver rods appeared between his fingers, as if conjured from the air. Its surface was still etched with his name. He hung it on the nail. The wind stirred, hesitant, then full. The chime sang soft, delicate, haunting. Arthur stood there until dawn, listening, tears drying on his cheeks. The sound filled the morning, reaching across the trees, into the fields, into the town beyond. And when the sun rose, the people of Willowmere woke to the faint, familiar tinkling that had haunted them once before. They whispered among themselves, he's keeping it up. Then none of them noticed that the song had changed. The melody now carried a new voice, deeper, sadder, endlessly repeating the same refrain. 1 year, or 1 life, and from that day forward, whenever the wind blew over the Calder house, it didn't just sing, it breathed. The mornings in Willowmere grew strange after that. People would stop mid-sentence in cafes, hearing faint notes drift across town, like echoes from a church bell they couldn't locate. Children cried without knowing why. Dogs refused to walk past the old Calder property. At first, the sound came only when the wind blew east, gentle, far away, mournful, but by the 3rd week, it had no direction at all. It came from the earth, from the power lines, from the hollow between one breath and the next. The town grew uneasy. And Arthur, if it was still truly Arthur, was seen only rarely, always at a distance, always standing on the porch. Head tilted, as if listening to something no one else could. Here, inside the house, the walls had changed. They seemed to pulse softly now, as though each plank and nail moved in rhythm, with the chime's unseen breath. Dust motes hung in the air, like stars caught in currents that didn't follow the wind. The air was thick with resonance, vibrating faintly, even in silence. Arthur no longer slept in a bed. He slept in the hall, on the floorboards, because that was where the house sang loudest. He didn't remember the last time he had eaten, or shaved, or looked in a mirror for longer than a few seconds. Tuneless sounds that fit perfectly into the chime's melody, as if his body were keeping time with it. He spoke to it now, not out loud at first, but in his thoughts. He had discovered that when he thought in rhythm measured, even steady the wind answered. It rustled the curtains, shifted the beams, tapped the windows. On the 22nd night, it spoke back clearly. You are almost ready, it said. Arthur flinched awake, ready for what? To finish the breath. He sat up, eyes wide in the dark. I don't understand. The wind remembers. It does not forget its shape. You are what it was promised. No, he whispered, voice trembling. I just hung a chime. I'm no one. You are the keeper, the wind said, almost tenderly. You are the one who opens the door. Outside, the chime struck once, then again. The sound was clear as glass breaking underwater. Arthur rose, walked barefoot through the hall. The boards hummed under his steps, the sound resonating with each heartbeat. He reached the front door. The silver glow was faint now, almost beautiful, like moonlight soaked into wood. He opened the door. The yard was moving. Not the grass, not the trees, asterisk, the area itself. Asterisk, it shimmered like a sheet being lifted by. Invisible hands. The world beyond seemed warped, the horizon bending inward. And standing in the yard were figures, dozens, hundreds, every shape and age imaginable. The dead he'd seen before, but solid now. Flesh that glowed faintly, like reflections trapped in dew. At their center stood the girl, in white. Her eyes were hollow light. "You kept us," she said softly. "You remembered, stepping back." "I didn't mean to." She smiled. "Meaning doesn't matter. Memory is stronger than mercy." He stumbled into the porch rail. "What do you want from me?" The girl tilted her head. "Not from you." Asterisk through asterisk you. The chime rang again low, deliberate, final. The crowd of figures inhaled together, and Arthur felt the air rush out of his lungs as if stolen. He fell to his knees, gasping, his chest burned. The sound grew louder, each tone sharper, until the night itself quivered. Elias's voice whispered behind him. "They can't stay without you." Arthur turned, and there his father stood closer than before, more solid, sadness carved into every line of his face. "Please, Father, Arthur," rasped. "Tell me how to end it." "You don't," Elias said quietly. "You asterisk become asterisk it." Arthur's eyes widened. "No, but it was already happening." His body began to glow from the inside, veins lighting up like molten silver. His heartbeat slowed 10 deep and like a drum. His mouth opened, and a sound poured out, a single, sustained tone. So perfect it didn't seem human. The chime above the porch began to shake violently, spinning faster and faster, until the rods melted into streaks of light that spiraled toward him. They sank into his chest one by one, their glow merging with his breath. The runes spread across his skin, weaving patterns up his neck and face. The girl in white stepped closer. Her voice was no longer her. Own it was the voice of the wind itself, old and endless. "The wind remembers, and you are its name." Arthur's scream broke into harmony. His body lifted from the ground, weightless, every atom trembling with the vibration of sound. The figures in the yard began to dissolve, their shapes collapsing into thin streams of light that circled him like ribbons. Each time one touched him, a memory flared, a flash of their lives, their deaths, their forgotten names. He saw them all. Every soul the Calder line had ever bound to the chime. Every voice that had kept the wind alive. They entered him, and he felt their sorrow, their longing, their strange, aching gratitude. And then stillness. The world fell utterly silent. The figures were gone. The storm clouds vanished. The night sky cleared, leaving only the sound of a single breather. Wind returning, tentative, newborn. Arthur stood alone on the porch. The scars on his arms no longer glowed. The chime was gone. But when he exhaled, the air shimmered faintly, and a faint, metallic whisper followed his breath. He understood then. The chime didn't hang from wood or metal anymore. It hung from asterisk him, asterisk he was the wind's anchor now, its memory, made flesh. "When don't come, down the porch empty. No Chime, no Arthur." Just the faint sound of something humming through the trees, a human voice. Distant but constant, singing wordlessly to the morning air. They said it sounded sad. They said sometimes, when the wind blew just right, you could hear words in it. 1 year, or 1 life, and somewhere in that voice, if you listen closely, another voice older, weary, endlessly patient would whisper. He kept his promise, then the wind would move on. And the song would begin again. Montpasset. Before, Willowmere remembered how to be quiet again. The air lost its charge. The nights no longer hummed. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a strange gentleness, the kind that feels borrowed. Like the world itself is catching its breath after something unspeakable. The Calder house stood empty. Grass grew tall around its porch. Dust veiled its windows. The town avoided it, though none could say exactly why. No one admitted why. On calm evenings, when the sun went down behind the sycamores, a faint shimmer still hovered around the eaves, as if light bent differently there. People told each other that it was just a trick of reflection, a remnant of broken glass or weathered paint. But no one crossed the fence line, not anymore. And yet, Someone or something had begun tending the property again. Neighbors noticed the grass never grew to wild. The porch, though empty, was always clean, swept of leaves and debris. Once, Mrs. Baines's cousin swore he saw the porch light turn on by itself when a storm rolled in. He never spoke of it again, but his hand shook for days afterward. Then, exactly a year to the day after the wind first sang over Willowmere, the chime returned. It happened at dusk. The sky was grey, heavy with rain. The wind picked up without warning, one of those uneasy gusts that comes from no direction at all. And from the colder porch, faint at first, came the familiar tinkling, soft, deliberate, rhythmic. People froze where they stood. A farmer out by the ridge heard it and stopped his tractor midfield. A shopkeeper closing up her store stood motionless with her key in the lock. A child dropped his toy and started to cry without knowing why. The chime had returned to its post. No one saw it happen. There was no sign, no footprint on Ogun Lech. But when the sheriff dared to drive out the next morning, there it was, hanging exactly where it had been a year before, gleaming like new. He didn't go closer. He only stared from the gate, had clutched tight in his hand. The wind passed through the chime once, producing a note so pure it felt like a thought pressed against the inside of his skull. And in that note, for the briefest instant, he heard a voice. 1 year, he turned his truck around and never went back. Be midsommer again. A drifter on the highway claimed he'd seen a man walking the edge of the woods near Willowmere. Barefoot, his clothes in tatters, his face pale as smoke. Said the man was humming, quiet and steady, a tune that didn't seem human. 2 teenagers broke a dare and drove past the Calder property after midnight. They never went past the fence, but they swore they saw movement inside someone standing in the window upstairs, swaying like a shadow caught in candlelight. The next morning, both their cell phones were found dead, batteries drained, screens faintly warm to the touch. The pastor tried to bless the road leading to the house. He lasted 10 minutes before collapsing mid-prayer, his voice lost to a sudden gust of wind that didn't touch a single leaf. He left town a week later. Then came the diary. A local boy, Daniel Pierce, buried Bizav Bay Creek behind the Calder Woods. It was leather-bound, soaked from the rain, the pages warped and brittle. Inside were hundreds of entries, everyone written in the same narrow, urgent handwriting. The first page read simply, Day 1, the chime breathes. As the entries continued, the writing deteriorated, the words looping and trembling as if written in fever. Day 37 I'd hummed teeth. Day 68 when I sleep. They tell me to stay in tune. Day 102, Father was wrong. The song isn't to keep them out. It's to keep them satisfied. Day 180, the house is learning to sing without me. Day 271, my bones ring when the storm comes. Day 333, 1 year. It always asks for 1 year. The final page was smeared, half the words dissolved by water, but one line was still legible, written in a thicker, darker ink than the rest. I can hear them beneath the porch. They're building another one. The diary ended. There, that autumn, the first stranger moved into the Calder house. A now tough-towner, a middle-aged man named Harrison Clay, a writer from Chicago. He'd bought the property for a fraction of its worth, dismissing the locals' warnings as superstition. Ghost stories, he called them with a grin. Every small town's got them. On his first day, he noticed the chime. It's a bit old-fashioned, he told the real estate agent, chuckling. But charming, you might not want to take it down, she said quickly, eyes flicking toward it. Folks around here are a little superstitious, he laughed. Oh, come on. It's just a wind chime. He took it down that same evening. The next morning, the wind didn't blow. The trees stood perfectly still. But all across Willowmere, people woke before dawn to a sound so strange, so piercing, that they couldn't describe it afterward. It wasn't quite music. It wasn't quite screaming. It was the sound of breath, thousands of breaths pulling in at once and never letting go. By the time the sheriff reached the Calder house, the door was open and Harrison Clay was gone. The chime was back in its place and carved freshly into the porch beam beneath it, as though traced by invisible hands, were 5 words that shimmered in the morning light. The wind remembers its name. That night, the chime began to sing again. The people of Willowmere closed their windows. They tried not to listen. But the wind always finds a way in. And if you stand at the edge of town when it blows from the north, You can still hear it faint, patient, eternal whispering in the dark between each note. 1 year or 1 life. Please paste the full story text here so I can extract and format it according to your instructions.